Coming up, the New York Football Giants capped off a disastrous Monday Night Football performance at home, losing to the Seattle Seahawks. We take a look at Daniel Jones. How far has he regressed, and who's responsible for the poor play of the offense? We dive in next. Yes, sir. It's OGP, the One Giant podcast, where we are your host over here, Adam Arbrecht, covering the Brooklyn Nets on the Locked On Nets podcast and your New Jersey Devils on the Devils Puck Luck podcast. Joined as always by the season generational ticket holder, the healthy, the wealthy, the wise, and the mostly depressed one, Andrew Makowitz. How are we, sir, on a Tuesday?
Do we have to do this? Do we have to do this, Adam? That's like the first question that I have for you out of the gate is like,
I thought you were quoting the players from the Giants. Do we have to go out there and do this? Do we have to go out and play games?
Oh, you mean like in the fourth quarter when they're down 20-something points and like Daniel Jones is getting trotted out there still, and everyone's like, do we have to? Like,
who knows? Maybe before week one against the Dallas Cowboys. That could be the sentiment we've gotten from not only Daniel Jones, but a lot of these players. Yeah, man, it's a bummer. We obviously know. So you and I, we came in, we previewed this game. We talked about if ever there was an opportunity, look back at the second half of the Arizona Cardinals game, Seattle Seahawks. They have a very vulnerable pass defense. And then you go out and you just have as bad of a performance that we've seen all year, including the 40-0 blowout loss to open up the season. Because once again, there's moments in here. We'll talk about what were little glimmers of bright spots from individual players. But at the highest possible level, whatever you thought was possible was immediately dismantled by Daniel Jones and what feels like a real regression from a lot of the positives we saw at the tail end of last year and things that were being discussed and reported throughout training camp ahead of this season.
Yeah, Adam, we kind of looked at the Cowboys game and said, that's a one-off. Things got out of hand really fast. And then you saw the Arizona Cardinals game where Daniel Jones and the offense looked terrible for a half, and then he looked like one of the best quarterbacks in the league for the second half, right?
Sure.
And so we kind of said, okay, that this is more of what we'll potentially see. Turnover, short week against the 49ers. We kind of write it off again, right? And we say, no Andrew Thomas, no Saquon Barkley. Like, what were we supposed to do against that type of team that has Super Bowl aspirations? So we've kind of given excuses for the one-offs and they're a Super Bowl team and all of those things. This was not the game for that. The Seahawks defense was not otherworldly like Dallas or San Francisco. Their offense looked relatively mediocre against this Giants defense in this game. There was all the opportunities in the world for the Giants to be able to move the ball down the field. And the first 5 minutes, 7 minutes of actual play time, the Giants did move the ball down the field pretty well. And you thought this could be the way that the Giants should easily be able to throw against the Seattle Seahawks. Adam, it just didn't happen. It felt like after that, it was mistake after mistake after misread, after not going through the progression. And I don't know, where do you want to start? Do you want to start on Daniel Jones specifically? What do you think? What do you think was the issue with Daniel Jones in this game, or maybe in a larger scale?
Yeah, well, it's like the cumulative, right? Now we're 4 games into the season, what used to be considered the quarter mark of the year when we had just 16 games. Yeah, I think, listen, that opening drive, right? You look at it and you say, we know first 10 to 15 plays are scripted and they mostly looked good, right? A little bit of Wan'Dale Robinson as he gets back healthy. You're seeing these little moments, and then you get down there in the critical spot and Daniel Jones again makes mistakes. It's hard for me to look at this relative to what we saw going back to some moments last year. And maybe you make the case for the second half of the Arizona Cardinals game. That's a better team than we perceived. But at the same time, we understand the deficiencies of the offensive line and what a mess. But I have to move past the idea that, well, because he's under pressure so often, then even when he has time, it looks bad. Sorry, that's not good enough. When you have moments, when you have time, you need to go through your progressions. You need to find those receivers in the spots, and he hasn't done it. And he didn't do it with consistently last night. If you said that he had 10 opportunities, whether in the red zone and touchdowns and ended up in turnovers, if he had 10 opportunities to make better plays, better decisions, impact plays, he didn't do it. He didn't do it. And it really does feel like a regression now after 4 games for Jones.
Adam, you're absolutely right with the way that you're thinking about it, because I sat and stewed over this for a while after watching the game and thinking, like,
Things got pretty dark for Andy, by the way. The text exchanges that we were having, The comparisons that Andy was making for Daniel Jones they were shocking.
I mean, I can say it on the podcast, Adam. The weird thing was watching Daniel Jones. Let me first go on what you said. You had mentioned, listen, the offensive line was bad. They were historically bad. Whatever you want to say about the line, fine. But even still, there were opportunities for Daniel Jones to make plays. The offensive line didn't throw the ball to Witherspoon for a pick six. That was not on the offensive line. The offensive line did not miss a wide open Wan'Dale Robinson 30 yards down the field doing jumping jacks, waving at how open he was. That was not the offensive line. That was Daniel Jones. It wasn't the offensive line that had photos of Brian Daboll looking at Daniel Jones and throwing a tablet at him, being like, what are you looking at? That is not the play that we discussed. And so that's what really frustrates me is, was the offensive line terrible, and did they not really give the offense a chance to move the ball down the field? Sure. But Daniel Jones had 3, 4, 5, 7, to your point, maybe 10 opportunities to really change this game. And I think, what we were talking about before is he was afraid to go through his progressions. Like he was staring down wide receivers. Witherspoon said it in the post game. He said, we knew that he stares at the place that he's going to throw the ball because he's so scared to go through the progression. And Adam, he was pushing the ball down the field vertically. It felt like the first 3 games of Zach Wilson out there, not being too terrified to be able to push the ball more than 7 yards down the field.
That interception there at the goal line, remember, like it's, so he's staring down the receiver, and that's problem number 1, not going through progressions. The reason why Brian Daboll is so angry with him is it's supposed to be, hey, look, Darren Waller is running towards that back pylon. You got to loft that thing over the top. Now, Daniel Jones is tunnel visioned. He doesn't even see it, doesn't even see, Witherspoon there either. But then on top of which, remember, go back to week 1 of last year. It's not the exact same play, but it's strikingly similar. Trying to throw it to Saquon Barkley at the front pylon on the left side of the end zone. He just drills it into the belly of the defender, and Brian Daboll, it goes over at the sideline, says, like, what are we doing here? That is not a viable option, and you have open receivers. That's my biggest frustration coming out of this. Listen, we'll talk about the offensive line. We'll talk about Bobby Johnson, right? There's plenty of reasons, and Brian Daboll and Mike Kafka, right? Like, are they doing enough to try to give some opportunities? But when you think about the fact that on 50% of the mistake plays for Daniel Jones, it's not just that he throws the pick, it's that there's actually real open opportunities elsewhere and he's not getting to them. Like, that is what is infuriating about this, because that makes it harder, at least in theory, to fully judge the offense, because you could be talking about big chunk plays here, even in a losing effort, and we don't get that. We get mistake after mistake.
Yeah, and Adam, I've been the biggest Jones defender, as you know. I've seen so many positives from him using his legs, scrambling, getting open. The second half of last year, like I said, in the Vikings playoff game, he was the best player on the field. He was literally the best player on the field. And whatever that version of Daniel Jones was, is not here playing football for the New York Giants for whatever reason. And listen, online, everyone is doing the blame game now, right? That pointing fingers. Everyone who's been a Daniel Jones detractor is feeling very, very good about themselves right now.
Sure.
My question for you is, you can take it for the whole entire season, or you could just take it just purely to last night. If you had 100% of the blame and you could slice it up any way you want as to what happened last night, how would you slice up that blame?
I would probably, the lion's share goes to Daniel Jones. I'll put it that way. Now, whatever. 70% on Daniel Jones' decision-making, 25% on offensive line, big plays, which probably should be a little bit larger. And then there's some little percentage around, the incidentals. And by the way, maybe reduce a little bit, a lot of penalties in this game too, like sloppily played game here. We've seen this multiple times now under Brian Daboll, which is concerning. We've seen special teams issues there with Eric Gray. He gets yanked from it. Now we're putting back veteran experienced corners to field our special teams punts and kickoffs. Like, mile deep, we could go on this stuff. But again, the lion's share of it comes back to Daniel Jones for the reasons we just mentioned. Yes, the offensive line play has been bad. Now, something has to go to the offensive coordinator and the play calling here, because if you just think about it in totality, as we take a minor step back here, this is a game where the Giants had 17 first downs to 13 over Seattle, where they ran 74 total plays. That's 23 more than Seattle had to run. Yet They gained only 248 yards. They had just 3.4 yards per play. And Daniel Jones in this game, as we know, threw for just 203 yards and had multiple interceptions, as well as the sack fumble, where frankly, he was not well aware of his blind side there after trying to move around in the pocket. But when between Drew Lock coming in the game, who looked like he could be a Pro Bowl player against this defense for that time, when Geno Smith comes into that game, the offensive ability to roll him out, just get him to the edges of the field. You got to do that more consistently for Jones. The downside here, Andy, and I know I'm being long-winded, is that even when they did that, Daniel Jones was running himself out of bounds for sacks on those plays. Like, it's just, dude, whatever his mindset is right now, the $40 million a year contract has not afforded him seemingly the security to say, I'm going to grip it and rip it. I don't have to worry about making mistakes here because I'm secure now. It doesn't seem to have instilled that confidence in him.
It is wild to me just how indecisive Daniel Jones looks, afraid to make the big mistake or make the big play.
Decisive. He's decisive with the only guy he's looking at, regardless of the coverage. I'm throwing it to here. I know what you mean. I'm being,
right. But like when he's rolling out, it's like he's like, am I going to go out of bounds? Am I like he could just, if it was Aaron Rodgers, the ball would just be flicked into the fifth row before anyone even touches him. And with Daniel Jones, like, you're wondering if the ball is going to come out. Is he going to take a sack? Is he going to throw like an inexcusable interception? Adam, like you said, last night's game, the lion's share goes on Daniel Jones. He looked like a deer in the headlights. Even Brian Daboll and the coaching staff were getting frustrated with him, being like, you have to play better. I know it's not perfect around you, but you have to do it. The Seattle Seahawks were down 4 offensive linemen. They figured out a way to make it work. Like, we have to figure out, some of it's Jones, some of it's the offensive line, some of it's scheme, but Daniel Jones has to play better, has to play more confident, and has to push the ball down the field.
I just don't think he has it in him right now. And it doesn't mean you can't come back from it. But I mean, let's just be realistic here. We're going to move on to injury notes, and we're going to take a look over the course of this week, obviously at the big high level perspective, something that I already mentioned last week, by the way. I said this coming into this game, what a loss in this game, and by the manner in which you potentially lose this game would mean for this team and certain players. But I mean, let's be realistic here. He goes 34 attempts, 203 yards, 3 turnovers in this game. He went 22 of 32 for just 137 yards against the San Francisco 49ers. The second half of the Arizona game, that's it. That is the only quality football that he's significantly put on here. And he's put in QBRs of 22, 37, outlier for Arizona 76, and a 9.1. It's just not, it's flat out not good enough. And people are going to point to, you look at the sacks, he's one of the only 3 or 4 quarterbacks that have been sacked as many times as he has over the course of the season. But go look at those other teams. Sam Howell is one of them. He's not perfect. He's not great. But guess what? His team is in games. That team competes, and they have holes on their offensive line as well. They have inconsistencies in their play. This team does not look like it can compete game in, game out. And we could probably talk about game script and how this defense, at least for times in this game, certainly gave this team overall an opportunity to be in it, to be in this game all the way through 4 quarters.
Yeah, Adam, and the challenge is, it didn't feel like the Seattle Seahawks were significantly better than the Giants. Like, my takeaway was, when you watch the San Francisco game, when you watch the Dallas game, it felt like they had a plan and they figured it out, and we were not competing in those games the way that we wanted to. It felt like the Giants had opportunities to be in this game. If Daniel Jones does not throw that pick 6 and he throws a touchdown or they run it in, they're down a field goal. They're down a field goal. They're in the game, and they have an opportunity to win, even with everybody playing horrifically. Like, that's why the margins are so slim. Instead, he throws a pick 6. That's a 14-point swing. He fumbles the ball. He throws another interception later. Like, it just felt like it got out of hand. And Adam, when we talk about, switching it over to kind of the injury notes, we lost 2 of our players on the first drive on 4th down. It's crazy.
100%. Yeah, I want to get to, and just quickly here, the comparison that you can make when it comes to Daniel Jones and team play over this first 4 weeks of the season is that none of these teams, San Francisco put them in their own category, but look at Arizona, look at other teams around the league. There are teams that have injuries across the offensive line. You said, just like Seattle did, right? Guys that are missing players, etc. Those QBs are not playing at such a detriment. I mean, we're on Mac Jones territory here, where this guy Daniel Jones is actively sabotaging his team's opportunity to stay in games. And I cannot believe that we're talking about that here at this point of his career, where at a minimum, remember, you use the term, and I'm not bringing it up to knock you, force multiplier. There were moments, the playoff game against the Vikings last year, where he was that. And while we can split hairs around what the organization did not do on the offensive line to make sure that he can continue to be successful, at some point you break a quarterback. And whether it's organizationally they've done it, whether he's doing it to himself, that's where it feels like we are. Now, to your point, injuries. So the Giants have had injuries. We know that. No Andrew Thomas, no Saquon Barkley coming into this game. Then you get inside of this one. We end up losing. Shane Lemieux goes out with a hip issue that's going to be, he was ruled out ahead of the contest there. Daniel Bellinger was questionable going in. Michael Schmitz was questionable going in. And then we go ahead and lose more players immediately in this one, which, Andy, do you like, it feels like it's like, oh, well, and then look, because of the injuries, like I'm pushing past all the injuries. Like, I'm sorry, I don't use it as an excuse anymore, understanding that it is a real thing, and the Giants do have that on their roster right now.
It's tough. I mean, listen, you got to roll with the punches. It felt like Seattle was losing players left and right. Their quarterback got knocked out of the game for a little bit. Like, you got to kind of roll with the punches. And look, I want to use it as an excuse, because that would give me hope that if the team was healthy, they would be contributing and they could be competing against any of these teams that are coming up on the schedule. The problem, Adam, is you're going to have injuries across the rest of the season. Even if Saquon Barkley comes back, even if Andrew Thomas comes back, you're going to have another injury. There's going to be an injury on the offensive line. A wide receiver is going to get hurt. Things are going to happen. This team has not shown the ability to overcome any of that adversity at all. And that's really where the challenge is for me. And, you know, we talk about the injury notes. The offensive line looks like it's a little bit of a mess right now, as we mentioned, with injuries and inefficient play. The team just earlier today signed former first-round pick Justin Pugh as an interior offensive lineman to try to right this ship. He's coming off a leg injury, season-ending leg injury from last season. We don't know what we're going to get from him. But, man, I'm just wondering, like, will it matter for the Giants to get back Andrew Thomas and Saquon Barkley or not? Like, at what point do they come back and it feels like it almost could be a lost season, right?
Well, it already is. Like, it already is. Now, if you go and look at this schedule and you do it kind of at a high level, you say, we're going to lose to Dallas. Yeah, it's going to be a tough game, right? It doesn't matter about how it ended up actually playing out. You want to beat Arizona. You're going to lose to San Francisco. You feel like you want to go in with a puncher's chance against Seattle. So on paper, you could say, well, you know, you just need to go 2-2 in those games. Okay, you're 1-3, but it's not real anymore. Take away the Arizona game, 15 points for this offense in those other 3 games. You're going on the road to Miami. You're going on the road to Buffalo. And we did this, by the way, which we know. You can't just go down the list and say loss, win, whatever. But we know when you got to what was supposed to be maybe a soft stretch there with the Commanders, the Jets, and the Raiders, I don't care that you could lose the next 2 weeks and be a 1-win team, but say, hold on now, 2 weeks later, we could be 3-5 and still be in the mix. That would be malpractice from this organization at this point, because that means you're trying to sell this idea that you are somehow, by the way, losing to Seattle, a team that stands in your way in the wild card discussion, that you somehow think that a team that has looked this bad to start the year is going to turn it around, which, by the way, with no track record, say, like the Cincinnati Bengals, who in the AFC are struggling mightily right now, they have a track record. They've gone to a Super Bowl with this core of players. They've won a ton of football games. This Giants core has not. I know they went to the playoffs last year. They have not checked any of those boxes to say, steady as we go, and we can get this thing back on track, knowing you still have Dallas again, knowing you could lose both games to the Commanders potentially, and you still have Philly to deal with. And they may not be the same team we thought they were from last year to this year. Guess what? They're still a heck of a lot better than we are.
Giants are 1-3. You kind of thought if you played the schedule out before the season, they would be 2-2. They're a game behind expectations. But Adam, it's not about just being one game behind. It's about the way that they have looked throughout the season gives you no hope that they are going to figure this out. But Adam, they have to figure out a game plan moving forward on offense. As you mentioned, the schedule does not get easier. You're talking about playing against the 2 highest scoring teams in the league back-to-back upcoming with the Bills and the Dolphins. And without
And the
having
Dolphins coming
any
off a loss to the Bills, right? And wanting to get a little bounce back, right? Wouldn't you have loved it if the 70-point performance was ahead of playing the Giants? Maybe they get a little bit sleepy-eyed around playing New York. No, instead they play a division opponent. They take a loss. They know they need to bounce back in a big way, and they're absolutely explosive on that team.
It would have been a better setup having them have all the confidence, maybe take a look past the Giants. Instead, they're really coming off a loss and ready to get some redemption. And so that doesn't bode well for Wink Martindale in that defense. And listen, we can talk about a few bright spots. Kayvon Thibodeau got in the backfield, so let's give him some credit for getting 2 sacks in this game. You know, some slight positives. Wan'Dale Robinson looked good. He looked like that type of possession receiver that may be able to get us 6, 7, 8 yards. And so there are little nuggets of things that you're like, okay, if we see more of that, that's a positive. But overall, special teams, a mess. Offense, a mess. And frankly, the defense only gave up 17 points, but that's because Seattle didn't have to score any more points. Like, I kind of sit there and say, if it's a tie game at 17-17 and Geno Smith has to go down the field, are you still 100% confident that our defense can get a stop? I don't walk away from that game thinking that.
And by the way, because that's where we can kind of wrap this one up, and then we're going to talk about, you see it there, it says team on the brink. We're talking about some of those points here, but we're going to talk about it from a high level as well for the New York Football Giants. When you go inside this game, to your point, we're going to go back and talk about like where does the team rank? Well, defensively, give 160 passing yards. Yeah, they only needed 40 passing yards to win this football game, right? So it's all relative to what the game script is and what this team needed to do in order to beat the New York Football Giants. If we just want to round out, special teams, got a real problem there. Offensive line coach, we got a real problem there. Multiple coaches. And then you touched on Wan'Dale Robinson. I'm going to give you a little Doug Norrie from the Locked On Nets podcast reference here because he watched that game. And it was like early on, he goes, Jesus, I mean, first of all, what a mess. But also he's like, just throw it to Wan'Dale Robinson on every play. How do you use him as a running back early in the game, get a positive return from it, like make it look like, hey, like we have a real chance to use it, and go, we'll never do it again. We'll never use that play again as long as we live. You know, you don't have Saquon Barkley. Matt Breida, listen, he had a couple little moments, and nobody's going to be able to have success with the way things go. But he finishes 14 for 30. Again, Daniel Jones, 10 for 66. The 112 rushing yards is also going to be incredibly clouded in this idea of the Seattle defense was like, we don't even have to pressure you. We're just going to hang out. You want to run for 10 to 12 yards here and there? Good for you. We're just waiting for you to lob us the football. So everything is so skewed in this perspective that there are other levels all the way to the coaching of like, are you doing it the best way possible? And I question when you see Dable and the disgust that he showed towards Daniel Jones, I really do think that we're at a point now where Brian Dable is, I'd be very curious to have gone behind the scenes here and understand the way Joe Schoen and Brian Dable talked about Daniel Jones in the offseason prior to the contract, because I can paint a picture where Brian Dable says, hey, I know what I did with Josh Allen in Buffalo, and I may have told you that I can take Daniel Jones and do something with him, but I probably also told you I can do it with a lot of players. And I really do wonder where they stood when they made that choice this offseason relative to expectation.
Adam, at the end of the day, that game against the Seahawks left us with more questions than answers, I think is fair to say. Now, some people may say, no, that gave us all the answers we need and we know everything we need to know. But for me, it's how do we turn this around? Do we want to turn this around? Is there a benefit to winning 6 or 7 games? Like, how do we approach the rest of the season? And I think that's what we'll touch on in over the course of this week.
Yep, you're going to go ahead and be able to digest this one, live it, love it, enjoy it, soak up the misery that is being a New York Football Giants fan right now. And when we come back, next time you see us, it'll be answering that question. What does these first 4 games mean? What decisions should the organization be making? And where is there, if any, value in still trying to be competitive this year and win football games? You get over to YouTube. You follow us at One Giant Podcast. You get over to Twitter at AndyMac214, at Adam Armbrecht, and at One Giant Podcast, wherever you get your podcast needs fulfilled. Brutal, disappointing loss. I can make a case that is even more of a bad beat than it was in week 1, being shut out 40-0 against the Dallas Cowboys. We'll come back in. We'll keep talking about it because, gosh darn it, misery loves company. Until next time, though, as Andrew Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.
Coming up, now that